Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Yesterday, on the TubeView, you could see videos where we are using the least common multiple or least common denominator to find equivalent fractions. And as I told y'all yesterday, very important, because when we start adding and subtracting fractions, hopefully tomorrow, we'll see where we're at, but hopefully tomorrow, then you will have this information ingrained in your brain, so much ingrained in the membrane, so much that you'll be able to do this part of it easily. This part of it easily. So the assignment that you're about to get looks like this here, where it gives you two fractions, and then there's a blank line where you put the answers. The instructions on it are use the least common denominator to write equivalent fractions for each fraction. So your answer, the blank line, is going to have two fractions on it. Two fractions on it. As opposed to one, which I did see some in the first class, where they thought writing 1 was the same as writing 2. 1 is not the same as 2. 2 is greater than 1. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So we're using our least common multiple or least common denominator to find equivalent fractions for this. These two. We need these two to have the same denominator. But we cannot. And the rock means cannot change the value of the fractions. And remember we talked about yesterday, and everyone agreed, if you multiply a fraction by 1, because a fraction is a number, if you multiply any number by 1, you don't change the value. We also agreed yesterday that any fraction that has the same numerator as denominator equals 1. We agreed on that yesterday. It didn't change in the last 24 hours. Those facts did not change. Those facts are the facts of life. You take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. The facts of life. It's an old TV show. It's probably way before your time. Way before your time. But Joe on there was kind of cute. Blair was cute too on that show. I'm just saying, Silas. So the first step in finding equivalent fractions for these two is to find our least common denominator. So I take my two denominators, which are what, Eric?
6 and 4.
6 and 4. And I list my multiples of my denominators until I find the first multiple that they have in common. It's not 24. It's not 24. If I list my multiples, 6, 12, 18, 24, but wait, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, but wait, it's 12. So then, I need to change 1/6 into a fraction that's over 12 without changing the value. And yesterday we talked about if I multiply this fraction by a fraction that equals 1, I'm not going to change the value. I'm changing how it's written. So as long as I multiply that fraction by a fraction that equals 1, I'm not changing the value. I'm just changing the way it's written. It's the same value. It's the same amount. I have fraction pieces to prove it. 1/6. Now I have to ask myself, what is my fraction that equals 1 that I would multiply by? Well, how I find that is I look at the two parts I have. I have both denominators. So I just have to figure out how I get from the 6 to the 12. And I know I'm multiplying. So 6 times what is 12? 2. So I need this fraction to equal 1. So it has to have 2 as a numerator and 2 as a denominator. It's a crazy looking 2. 2 as a numerator and 2 as a denominator. Because that fraction needs to equal 12. When multiplying fractions, you multiply straight across. Denominator times denominator equals the new denominator. So 6 times 2 equals 12. 1 times 2 equals 2. 12. They're all crazy in here.
I'm not.
So I'm saying 1/6 is equal to 2/12. Yes, I can prove that 1/6 is indeed equal to 2/12. It's very exciting. So one of my answers on the front of the paper would be 2/12. I need to change the other fraction so that it is something over 12. So I take 2/4 and I need it to equal something over 12 because that is my least common denominator. My least common denominator is 12. So I need to figure out what I multiply, and it has to be a fraction that equals 1, which means it has to have the same numerator as denominator. And I have to figure out 4 times what equals 12? Class, 3. And since it needs to equal 1, my numerator must be 3, and my denominator must be 3. And when I multiply fractions, I multiply straight across. 4 times 3 is 12. 2 times 3 is 6. Now, if you don't believe me that those two fractions are equivalent, once again, I can use my fraction pieces. There are 2/4 right there. I'm saying that 6/12 equals 2/4. The math is saying that 6/12 equals 2/4. And the... What do you need, Matthew? Can I go tinkle? Yeah, go ahead.
Why is there a fraction in the middle?
Fraction in the middle.
Or in one?
Because I want to signify that this fraction equals 1. It's just picturing it up for me. And indeed, 2/4 is equal to 6/12. So we're not changing the value, we're changing the way it's written. So the other answer would be 6/12. Now if you look at this page here, it looks like your question here, then the line where you're going to write your two equivalent fractions. You may have to do all of this work to get it. But I don't want to see all of this work on the front here because I don't like scavenger hunts to find your answer. So all of this needs to be done elsewhere. Journal, a piece of notebook paper, a dry erase board, somewhere else so that I'm not confused when I grade it. I pretty much stay confused most time anyway, but I don't want to be confused when I grade it. So let's look. Let's look at the next one. It's not my fault, it jumped right out of my hand. It's rude. Let's look at the next one, which I believe is number 4. It's 2/3 and 1/2. Oh, wrong. Right here. My goodness, Mr. McMurdo's not thinking. 2/3 and 1/2. So that's what the problem looks like. Then it has the blank line where we write our answers. You with me so far? You with me? Okay. So now I need to find the least common denominator for 2 and 3. So Phoenix, you know what it is? No? All right, let's work it out. 2 and 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 3, 6, 9. Boom! 6 is my least common denominator. 6 is my least common denominator. First common multiple they have is 6. So then I need to change each of these so that they have 6 as a denominator, and I multiply by 1, so I'm not changing the value. I need to do that with 2/3. I need to do that with 1/2. So I'm doing that with both of these because my answer up here is 2 fractions in this blank. Not 1, but 2. 2 is more than 1. I need 2, otherwise I have to mark it wrong. Alright, so now we're here. 2/3 equals something over 6. I could always use the fraction pieces that your teacher gave you that you could cut out, and have in a little baggie. You could always use those. But Chase, honestly, what is my fraction that equals 1 here? 2 over 2. It's got to have the same numerator as denominator. So Chase, 3 times 2 does 6. What is 2 times 2?
4.
4. So one of my answers is 4/6. Because 2/3 is equal to 4/6. Same value. I can check that with my fraction pieces that my teacher gave me, that I cut out, that I put in a sandwich bag, that I'm keeping in my green folder. I was. Now we have 1/2. We need to change 1/2 into something over 6 without changing the value. Zoe, what fraction that equals 1 would I use?
3/3.
3/3. Same numerator as denominator, which makes that fraction equal 1. Then I multiply straight across. Zoe, what is my numerator?
3/6.
3/6 is my new fraction. So 3/6 is my answer to that problem. And remember, on the front, I'm just going to have this. This part's there, so I'm only adding the 2 fractions. Because your teacher, that's me, doesn't want to do a scavenger hunt to find your answers. Just like when he's looking for a name on a paper, he wants to look at the top of the paper, not a quarter of the way down. Why didn't you see my name? It was right there. Crazy kids. Crazy kids. Phoenix.
How did you get the 3's and the 1?
Okay? How do I get the 3's and the 1? I found my denominator of 6, right? I know this needs to equal to 2 times something equals 6. So I know 2 times 3 equals 6. I need my fraction to equal 1. So it's got to have the same numerator as denominator. So then 1 times 3 equals 3. Make sense? Good. Thank you for those of you that paid attention, because there won't be 7,286 questions because you paid attention.
Yippee! He's T-posing first grade.
Boom, shakalaka, peace out. God bless, love you. Do something kind today. Sonic, sponsor me. Subscribe, please, so I can be rich and famous and don't have to deal with these knuckleheads anymore.